On an empty road in Oklahoma, an injured petite woman cautiously steps out of the passenger side of a black Ford V8 automobile, the windshield covered with bullet holes. Her companions, two other men seemingly in their mid-20s, are visibly weak and shaken. With their car stuck in mud, they have become what they made so many others in their path, sitting targets. The trio flags down a passing truck and waves their weapons in the air, demanding to be towed up the road. Another passerby quickly drives by, finding the scene suspicious. He drives on into the nearby town of Commerce and goes to the police. By the time two officers arrive, the truck was gone, but the mysterious trio and the Ford remained. As was routine procedure, the officers exited their vehicle to investigate, only to hear the woman yell wildly upon noticing them. Now, with their weapons drawn, the officers continue to move toward the car. Two machine guns appeared from the car and began firing at them. Although the officers were able to return 3 or 4 shots, one was hit in the abdomen, a bullet severing his spine and making him the final victim of Bonnie and Clyde.
Welcome to True Crime and Headlines. This is Season 1, Episode 1. I'm your host, Jo, a practicing board-certified psychiatric nurse practitioner.
And I'm your host, Jules, a former teacher and a lifelong consumer of true crime history.
We're about to be your true crime besties.
Oh, yeah.
And we are here to share stories that need to be heard.
True Crime and Headlines is a proud production of the women-owned AnnLee Audio House LLC. We would love your support by giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to donate to our podcast funds, we have links to do so on our website. And you can follow us on social media and say, hey. As always, we post episode notes, cite our sources, and give recommendations for further research at truecrimeandheadlines.com. All right, Jo, should we do this?
Let's do this.
This is the beginning of something great. So here we go. Meet us during the Great Depression in 1930s America, where two criminals just in their mid-20s are cemented into folklore legends for their toxic devotion to each other, totally overshadowing, murder of innocent bystanders. Bonnie and Clyde, the infamous duo legend, is often misrepresented as lovers. You know that, right, Jo?
I know very little about Bonnie and Clyde, but I do know that they were lovers.
So how this works is Jo doesn't really know the stories going into the podcast. So behind the scenes, I've been doing a bunch of research and reading books and public sources online and putting together a story as best to my ability. And Jo has not heard the story yet. And we wanted to keep her fresh because she is a professional at times.
We'll use that term loosely.
We cannot continue to perpetuate the fantasy of them as legends or folklore heroes.
Yeah, that's the first thing I think of when I think about Bonnie and Clyde is their romantic love and the heroism.
Oh, goodness gracious. Nor do they deserve to be given those titles. Jo, I will make you not like Bonnie and Clyde.
Not sure it's possible.
Oh, we are going to dive right into the crimes before we go into the backgrounds, though, Jo. And in the backgrounds, that's where we rely heavily on Jo and her expertise because we want to understand why they did what they did beyond the public's collective understanding of, they just loved each other. No, there was that Bonnie, like we said before, with Clyde, and there was that Clyde before the Bonnie. And then obviously together. So before we do that, we need to introduce just a few main characters. Although most only know about Bonnie and Clyde, the gang actually had another couple. So this was a husband and wife duo. Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother, and Blanche Barrow, Buck's wife. So the rest of the gang, just a few of the main characters. We have W.D. Jones. He was a family friend. So his mother was actually friends with Clyde's mother. So they grew up knowing each other throughout the years. And he joined the gang when he was just 15 or 16, after the gang was actually already well established. Then we have Henry Methvin. Henry Methvin didn't join the gang until the last 5 months. And how he joins is a bit of a wild story that we'll share soon. But I will say that if Henry Methvin had never come into the story, Bonnie and Clyde would likely have not died the way that they did. And then lastly, Raymond Hamilton. His relationship with Clyde may have been the most tumultuous of them all, and he is involved in most of the early crimes with Clyde. And now the time has arrived, Jo.
Boy meets girl?
Boy meets girl. Murderer meets murderer. January 5th, 1930, Bonnie Parker, just 4.
What a sweet little name, Bonnie Parker.
It's a total kindergarten roll call.
I love you, Bonnie.
Susie Jones here, Bonnie Parker.
She's so innocent.
She is so innocent. Yeah, okay. Stress me out, Jo. January 5th, 1930, Bonnie Parker, 4'11" and 110 pounds, just 19, meets Clyde Barrow, just 20, who was already a fugitive.
Bad boy.
What you gonna do? Bonnie goes to a friend's home and is in the kitchen when in walks a mutual friend, Clyde Barrow, and over hot chocolate. We're just gonna keep going. I'm having a friend for dinner. Over hot chocolate.
The two meet instantly.
And feel drawn to one another. Clyde, 5'7", handsome with what Bonnie's mother would later say is college boy good looks, had brown eyes and a slight dimple on his cheek.
Oh, I thought he was so cute.
He was really
this
cute.
naughty boy. Bonnie,
okay,
stay away, girl.
At this point, we can say naughty. As we go on, we have to say fatal. Downright horrible. I will allow that. Let the court records show. Bonnie and Clyde spent just a few weeks together, infatuated and spending as much time together as they could. So I didn't realize, Jo, that they had such a short amount of time together, just a few weeks before Clyde was arrested for car theft. So he was already a wanted fugitive for that car theft. He was actually arrested at Bonnie's house while staying on the couch. Yeah, he's a catch, right? He had already had a warrant. So he goes to prison and Bonnie is just beside herself and Clyde is beside himself. Here we have two young adults separated by the law, but refusing to accept it.
So what we have here is an external locus of control, right? Or placing blame on external forces versus kind of ownership. So I broke the law and therefore the law is after me. It's not my fault. It's the law's fault that we're separated.
I saw a lot of that when I taught high school.
Oh, it's real in adolescence. Absolutely.
Woo! Bonnie not only visits Clyde during his sentence, but is so in love with him that she agrees to help him escape by smuggling a gun to him inside the prison. It's with this gun that he and his cellmates escaped on March 11, 1930. Now, he's captured just 2 weeks later, and get this. So he was in for car theft, right? He escapes, he's recaptured, and then to make an example out of what happens when you escape from prison, we're going to sentence you, Clyde, to 15 years of hard labor at this notorious Texas prison. It's called Eastham Prison Farm. And it's said that at this farm, Clyde was often beat up by the guards from transgressions such as just complaining about the pace of the cotton picking expectation and for things like slipping his sister a note during a visit.
He probably should have just served the original sentence.
Yeah.
That was probably a lot less time away from his love, Bonnie.
Yeah, but I don't think Clyde would have ever accepted any kind of containment.
True.
In any sense. He's lived this, we'll go on to learn about this life of how Clyde wants to live, he's going to live. The whippings of prisoners was actually illegal. However, they still permitted it to continue in the corrupt prison State Farm. And Clyde witnessed prisoners breaking out into fights amongst themselves, and he actually witnessed one young prisoner being stabbed to death by another.
So we don't know a lot about Clyde's life yet. However, I suspect early trauma, and this would be another trauma, right? So now we're looking at complex trauma. I think this plays into the path of destruction.
I can feel for the inner child. I can feel for the adolescent type of person that Clyde is at this point, because witnessing that, and up to this point, he has only committed crimes that were nonviolent. And now he's in this prison with the worst of the worst.
Yeah. As a 20-year-old.
In his book, Go Down Together, The True Untold Story of Bonnie and Clyde, Jeff Gwynn reports that Clyde's first killing was seen as an act more so of self-defense. So this is what goes down, Joe. So we've got Clyde, who is a young, small, handsome new inmate. So he's marked for rape and assault, immediately. And it's actually his rapist that he eventually kills by crushing his skull with a pipe during an ambush in a bathroom.
Interesting. Do we know if it was in the act of the rape or after the rape?
Well, my understanding was that it was not in the moment of self-defense, but it was luring the rapist into the bathroom and waiting for that individual to arrive and then ambush by...
And was he charged?
No. So this is interesting. There's another inmate who was already doing life in Easton Prison Farm. And so he takes credit for the killing. Clyde's never held responsible. And I think that inmate took credit because the guy that was killed was a bigger fish, like the big honcho running the prison.
Yeah, clearly if he's,
Yeah, so take out, and this guy's already serving life.
Why not?
Why not? And get more cred.
Street cred.
Exactly. So it was a symbiotic relationship, I totally think. And we clearly know that Clyde does not stay in prison for 15 years doing hard labor. So he does manage to get out early. And how he does so is very interesting. So during this time, his mother, Kumi, begins writing the judge who oversaw Clyde's case to ask for his release. So Kumi, Clyde's mother, may be the original enabling mama, or like rose-colored glasses, or both. I don't know, but what I do know was that Kumi married Clyde's father when she was only 17. And they quickly went from a family of 2 to a family of 9.
Woohoo!
And this is during
hardly deal with a family of 4.
Well, they're very busy. Now, this is during World War I and leading into the Great Depression, and they were farmers. So
lots of help on the farm.
Lots of help on the farm, lots of mouths to feed as well. And she worked really hard to get Clyde out of jail by spinning lies. So according to History.com, Kumi tried everything from telling reporters that Clyde was still just a teenager under 18, which was a lie because
he was 20, right?
Yeah, she knew that they would show leniency on a teenager. And she also said she was a widow.
Dad's not dead.
Dad's not dead. She's not a widow. But she said she was, and she needed Clyde released so he could help bring in money. So we've got emotional manipulation. Why not, right? After being so diligent and dogged about getting her son out of prison, she was able to secure his release on the basis that he was just 18.
If only that happened these days, right? What about court records? Come on.
And he was really 21. However, during all this time, now this is where I lean towards, I hate to say siding with Kumi, but we don't know if she knew what was actually going on with Clyde. Was he able to convey the type of abuse that he was?
Yeah, I'm sure the prison was known for it, but also he got in trouble for trying to sneak his sister a letter. So was he trying to get the message out about how bad it was? Could they see that when they visited him?
Yeah, and we don't know, but if you found out.
I'd kill for my kids. Come on.
Yeah, suit up. Let's go.
Yep.
We don't know. But what we do know is that Clyde had no idea that his mother, Kumi, was successful in securing his release that was going to be scheduled in just a few weeks' time. So while that was going on and already in the works and already agreed he's getting released, he's in the background scheming up a plan to get out of the prison. And he believes that if he is physically injured, that he will not be responsible for doing the hard labor and thus get transferred outside of this horrible prison. So now this part always like throws me for a
What's
loop.
he do?
He has his big toe and part of his second toe chopped off with
That's desperation.
with an axe
Oh.
in hopes that this would render him physically useless.
Don't mind like possibilities. Sepsis, death,
Is
worth
that
it.
wild? Or I mean,
Yeah, that's desperation.
it reminds me
Oh my
of wolves in a trap who will chew their own leg off just to survive.
Yeah.
That survival instinct.
Can you
I mean,
imagine when he sees mom now and he's limping out because he has no toe? Little did he know that mom.
The whole time. I mean, knowing what we know now about, we know Clyde was not a good person. So knowing that and hearing this story, you're like, haha. But at the time, you're like, oh no, he wants to survive his toe and a half.
I can only imagine.
So just a few weeks later, as was already planned, on crutches, Clyde is released from prison. However, he would forever walk with a limp. And it is reported that because of this decision to chop off his toesies, he would have to then drive shoeless and in his socks just in order to feel the pedals of the car while he was driving.
You made it, bro.
So I totally think it's this experience at the prison with the law separating him from Bonnie, and then also in a way separating him in this pivotal removal of whatever innocence he had left. It propels his decision to continue crime because he continues from this point on to do robberies. And it was said that he was doing these robberies to get enough money to then in turn go back to the prison farm and take revenge on everybody who had wronged him. Shortly after Clyde returns home in West Dallas from trying out numerous honest jobs in an attempt to turn his life around, Bonnie told her mother that she had gotten a new job selling makeup and she would have to go to Houston. So remember, we're in the Great Depression. Jobs are not easily acquired. So her mother, Emma, was thankful for the work for her daughter. Just 2 days later, Bonnie would find herself arrested and in jail, needing her mother. So it later came out that Bonnie actually never had a job lined up, Joe. Instead, it was a planned robbery, which she joined Clyde on with his accomplices. So with many of Clyde's plans, this also did not go accordingly. They barely escaped in the stolen car and driving recklessly away. They managed to crash and get their car stuck in mud. So being able to escape the car, they're now injured, but the gang succeeds on getting away by foot to mount donkeys in a farmer's pasture to then attempt to ride said donkeys to continue their escape. So the donkeys would not move. So they're these criminals. I'm sorry. They're muddy and injured and in a panic, and they're sitting on these asses and they can't move. Sorry, I don't know why it's so funny to me. So then they have to dismount the donkeys, and they all run in different directions, but except for Bonnie and Clyde. And so Clyde is carrying Bonnie because she got injured. And he leaves her in a barn, and he tells
like
her,
the Virgin Mary.
I did not draw that.
You're welcome.
But I do appreciate that parallelism.
You're welcome. Do what I can.
So
it's like Jesus.
Bonnie, okay, so he leaves Bonnie straight up in the barn and he's like, yo, girl, I'm going to come back for you. You just sit here on this bale of hay injured and I'll come back for you. And she thinks he'll come back. And she waits and she waits and she waits for several hours. And now she thinks that, okay, Clyde got captured. So she decides to walk. And she's injured. So she's got this kind of zombie walk on the side of the road. This muddy, injured girl trailing down the side of the road, trying to hitchhike back to Dallas. And the police pick her up. And that's when she finds herself in jail. They put 2 and 2 together. She's
Poor
part
Bonnie.
of the gang.
She should have never met this guy.
Okay. Do not dismiss Bonnie's behaviors, though, Jo. So one of the accomplices, Ralph Fultz, was also with them, and he was picked up. And so he's smart. He never actually rejoins the gang. So you go, Ralph. Bonnie was in jail from March through early June when her case eventually gets dismissed and she's sent home with her mother. So it's during this time when she was locked up, however, that Clyde and some of the gang commit their first murder during a job gone wrong. Are we noticing a theme?
Time out. So she helps him get out right away.
For sure.
But he's like, deuces, babe. I'm going to go do this other stuff. Enjoy your time.
Well, he got out. And he tried to go on the straight and narrow and get some honest jobs, and it didn't work. And just after a few weeks or months, and then he went right back
to a life of crime.
Yeah.
All right. What was the first crime?
So before the name Bonnie and Clyde appeared in papers, Clyde and his accomplices were first known as the Root Square Gang. And this is where we have victim number 1. So John N. Butcher of Hillsboro, Texas, and he was killed April 27, 1932. John N. Butcher was 61 years old when he was shot in the chest in his own store by the accomplices of Clyde Barrow, Ted Rogers, or Frank Claus. It may, and I say or because the individual who actually fired the gun, which killed Mr. Butcher, is not known or confirmed.
Okay.
So it may never be known who actually killed him, but the order of events was relayed by Mr. Butcher's wife, who witnessed his murder. And this is what happened. A man came to the general gas station / jewelry shop / grocery, which John had owned. So living upstairs, he hears a customer call out from below asking to purchase some guitar strings. So it is the middle of the night, but John kindly obliges and goes to open up his shop. And when the customer pays with a $10 bill, which today would actually, do you know what it'd be equivalent to?
$100.
$218
For
today.
some guitar strings?
So he gives John a $10 bill, expecting change back because you would need, because equivalent today, it's $218. So I'm guessing what it would be like 25 cents, 5 cents at the time. So they know he would need a lot of change. And where do you get a lot of change to return from your safe? So John has to call to his wife, who's upstairs, and tells her, come downstairs and can you bring the key to open the money safe? You know, he's got a $10 bill. He's got to give all this change to this gentleman. So as John opens the safe to pull out the change, he's shot. Oh. Now, there are conflicting reports about John's own firearm. Some say he had it in his safe, and some say he actually had it tucked into his belt. And either way, it fell when he was shot, and his wife grabs it. And in an attempt to defend herself, the men manage to coerce her to put it down, and then they take off. And that's when she calls the police. And she's attending to her husband, who is now deceased on the floor. So Clyde later tells his sister Nell that he was not the one who shot the man, but rather it was one of his accomplices. And Clyde claims that he was in the car, and once he heard the gunshot, he took off.
I'm sure he's telling the truth.
Why would you say that? Is that because he just abandoned Bonnie?
Because he is a forthright person.
He's a douchebag.
I know.
So I read many different versions of the story. And the one which I cannot shake from my mind is that Clyde supposedly staked out this particular place as he was known acquaintances with the victim's son. Clyde knew there were guitar strings in the shop, and he knew the safe would need to be opened if he needed change from giving a larger bill. So Clyde is turning to crime against his fellow man. Clyde's own father owned a filling station. His own father ran the same type of business just to keep the family afloat during the Great Depression. So now John's wife, Medora, she's not only a widow, but she's a widowed woman during the Great Depression. And she will forever carry this trauma of witnessing her husband's murder. Now, this event becomes known as the Hillsborough murder. What blows my mind is that Clyde is committing these crimes against fellow man. It's not man versus government. It's man versus man during the Great Depression because he robs a filling station, a grocery, a place that his own father runs, the type of business. His father owns a filling station during the Great Depression just to provide for their family. And here's Clyde robbing and murdering by association, who we'll never know who actually pulled the trigger. We can't trust any of them.
So in cases like this, we use the term psychopath so kind of freely, I think too freely. So in psychology or in mental health, we have what we call the DSM, or it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And so right there, you have criteria for mental health diagnosis. So the term psychopath or the diagnosis psychopath was in the first two manuals. We're in manual 5 of the DSM. We update it periodically. And the first two editions or manuals, psychopath was actually a diagnosis there. It was replaced in the third manual by the diagnosis antisocial personality disorder. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because one of the kind of cardinal symptoms for both a psychopath and antisocial personality disorder is lack of empathy. And I think that we're entirely seeing it there in that scene where his own father owns a filling station. This could be his father's story, but yet he's able to follow through with this and then go on and lie to his sister about it as well. Lack of remorse and lack of empathy.
So it starts off in the DSM as a psychopath, and they changed the term to, what was it?
Antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, so did it completely erase the term psychopath?
Yeah, that's not an actual mental health diagnosis in the DSM today.
Interesting. So this event became known as the Hillsborough murder. And as a pattern with Clyde, when he finds himself in trouble, he runs home. And who would help him stay undercover? Mama! Cue me. She helped hide him in the back where he could stay and lay low. And just a month and a half later, Bonnie is home with her mother after her release from jail. And her mother, Emma, convinces Bonnie to stay away from Clyde.
Smart move, Emma.
Yes, Emma. And Bonnie appears to agree with her mother. You know, it's no way to live, and it's just, it wasn't worth it. Plus, Bonnie was actually very rattled from being in jail. And what happens just a few weeks later? Well, after promising Emma that she was quitting Clyde, she again does what Bonnie does best. She lies to her mother and promises a future on the straight and narrow going up north. Well, okay, so technically she didn't lie. Bonnie really did have a waitressing job lined up north in a small cafe, but this is the lie, was that Clyde was hiding out in the same northern town, waiting and plotting his next hit, alongside his accomplice, Raymond Hamilton. They would attempt to rob Newhoff Packing Company. And so Bonnie was not a part of the actual crime, as Clyde has driven her home to his mother's house in Dallas. So when they go to commit the actual crime, he's, yo, Bonnie, get in the car. I'm going to hide you with Cumi. And then I'm going to go with Raymond, and we're going to go back and do this job. Well, after about 5 days, they returned Bonnie to her mother's house so that he and Raymond could leave Texas for Oklahoma to lay low from the police. So they commit this job. She's hiding out with Clyde's mom. And then after the job, they're like, hey, go back to your mom and we're going to go hide out for a little bit until, we lay low. And it gets worse.
So Bonnie didn't actually commit that crime. She was with Kumi when they were actually doing the crime.
Correct. Okay. So she goes up there while they're staking out their next crime. And then when it actually happens, they drive her to hide out with his mom. So again, we have Kumi enabling. Yeah.
Not a good disciplinarian.
No.
Possibly the reason for all of these crazy behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Natural consequences, Kumi.
So they were in Texas and they leave. Bonnie's with her mom now, back with her mother. And the boys leave Texas to Oklahoma just to lay low from the police for a little bit. And lay low is exactly what they did not do.
Dun, dun, dun.
It is a hot mess on a hot summer evening in Stringtown, Oklahoma. Now, I don't want to downplay the sadness of this next story because here we have is another victim situation coming up. So we're in Stringtown, Oklahoma, where the men are supposed to be laying low. And we have a 30-year-old deputy sheriff named Eugene Moore, and then his partner, Sheriff C.G. Maxwell. So they spot a car parked behind a bandstand stage. Music's filling the air. People are all around dancing and having a great time. And it appears as though the 3 men in the car were drinking. Now, this is also during Prohibition, and these men look drunk. And so the police officers see these 3 men, and they go to approach the car, and they see empty whiskey bottles. Now, the 3 men were Clyde Barrow and Raymond Hamilton, the 2 men that had just committed that crime in Texas, were laying low in Oklahoma, obviously. And then they have one of Raymond Hamilton's friends. His name is Russ Dyer. And the 2 former were fugitives for the murder of John Butcher, the man shot while Clyde was allegedly in the car. So when the officers alluded to them that they were as good as arrested, the fugitives acted impulsively and opened fire on the officers, hitting both. However, C.J. Maxwell survived, but Deputy Sheriff Eugene Moore was pronounced dead on the scene. And the men fled the scene in a car, and it was reported that the officers actually didn't even know that the men were fugitives, nor did they know who exactly they were. They were just doing their job. Like, these men are in this car, they're extremely drunk, and hey, we got ya. And it was enough to rattle the fugitives. And, Eugene Moore, he was survived by his wife and his 3 young children.
Oh, so this is 3, right? So you've got the guy in prison, then you've got the guy that owns the shop, and now you've got the police officer.
Yes. The one in prison, we did not count towards the victims of the Bonnie and Clyde gang era, though.
Yeah.
So this would be technically victim number 2 from their exploits as the gang. Yeah, exactly. There are actually many events, Joe, that are rumored to be attributed to Bonnie and Clyde. We won't be going into all of those for this episode, but there were many events that people were just saying, oh, that was from Bonnie and Clyde. That was from Bonnie and Clyde. But they remain rumors to this day.
Okay.
Bonnie had such a deep connection with her mother, Emma, and she was known to cry often and inconsolably because she missed her mom so much whenever they are on the road, that her constant longing.
More reason to love Bonnie.
Her constant longing to want to visit home left Clyde with the only option to make it happen. Now, Clyde also had a close connection with his older sister, Nell, and his mother as well. So although he allegedly felt that he would be fine without going home along their crime sprees, Bonnie's needs helped convince him to do so. So in October of 1932, the pair took the roads home, tossed a glass bottle into her mother's yard, which was a signal that they were in town, and returned later in the dark of the night for a quick visit before once again fleeing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm thinking, how did Emma know that was did they set that up?
I'm assuming that it was just a known
thing.
Yeah, it was actually reported they had multiple different symbols when they would be in town, but I guess that would be the least noticeable one. Oh, it's
kind of
green
fun.
bottle in the yard. I'll see you tonight. Actually, Raymond Hamilton also had a close connection to his father in Michigan. And it's on this visit in December of 1932 where he falls in love with a woman. So this woman was a local waitress whom Raymond confided in about his crimes and involvement with Bonnie and Clyde. So everyone's going home and visiting their parents and their families, and loose lips, shink ships.
I sell seashores down my seashore.
Jimmy Shunch. Loose lips sink ships. He falls in love with this woman, and he tells her all about Bonnie and Clyde and yada, yada. I'm so sexy for this. And, okay, this man has fled police. He's killed police. He's robbed businesses. Yet all it took was a waitress who had another boyfriend who happened to be a cop.
Oh, whoops.
To take him down. So Hamilton was a bit of a frat boy type, and he was known for his wild social ways. And fittingly, he was arrested while he was taking his girlfriend roller skating, who was also someone else's girlfriend. So in roller skates, he is betrayed by his new girlfriend. So he can't get away because he's at a roller rink. And he's on these little roller skates, and he's ambushed by the cops. So where you gonna go, bro? And he goes to jail. And he's actually tried for that first murder of Mr. Butcher and another robbery. And he's actually eventually sentenced up to 263 years.
Oh,
in an Alabama jail. Please leave that. When Clyde hears about Hamilton's arrest, he is pissed. Now he's pissed at the law, and he vows to help Hamilton escape. With Bonnie and Clyde's main wingman, Raymond Hamilton, gone, they needed to recruit someone else to help them in the meantime because they needed more money. And now they have to stop their path of getting revenge on Easton Prison Farm, and they have to get Hamilton out first. So they have to recruit someone else. Who do they recruit? Well, a few failed robbery attempts later, they end up recruiting a young 16-year-old boy who knew the Barrow family for years. This is a teenager who looks up to Bonnie and Clyde. And so, by now the duo is actually already famous in the papers. And this kid's name is W.D. Jones. And although he was only 16, he was already in and out of jail. He boasted about his ability to steal cars and how he could be an asset to the duo. So what does Clyde love? Clyde loves cars.
And minors.
And interesting.
I mean, there's less there's less of a we just introduced a new piece
Bonnie
of
and Clyde After Dark.
There's less punishment for minors. So it would benefit him to have a minor in the group to take the hit.
And manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Power
sure.
control, course.
I'm glad you clarified. So just a few short weeks later, after Hamilton was transferred to the Alabama Penitentiary, Clyde decided to test out Jones's skills and loyalty. And this story will get you. So just those of you listening, I'm just going to be honest with you. I was very emotional after I was writing this part. I did actually cry. I think I called you, Jo, and told you I'm just really sad about this one situation. So
I told you to suck it up, Buttercup.
I was about to say there's nothing funny about this, and then you open your mouth. So here we are. But this actually is one of the most tragic stories. I'm going to hopefully I can get through it. Okay. So on Christmas Day, 1932, Clyde with Bonnie in a car. Now keep in mind it's a stolen car. drives W.D. Jones into a residential area outside of Dallas when they spot a brand new automobile just sitting outside, parked outside a home. W.D. Jones runs to the car, and although he talked up his car hijacking skills, he fails to start the car. What makes this failed attempt even worse, okay, I lied, there might be one funny part, was that the car was unlocked and the keys were in the ignition. So he still could not start it. Clyde was forced to run out and help Jones push the car when the residents of the house run out and see what's happening. The vehicle's owner, a young 27-year-old family man named Doyle Johnson, who was spending Christmas Day with his young family and his in-laws, runs out of the home just in time to see the two thieves starting his car. As he runs toward his car, W.D. Jones pulls out a gun, and during a scuffle, the firearm discharges and misses Johnson. Clyde then takes his .45 revolver and fatally shoots Johnson. Mm-hmm. The murderers then speed off in Johnson's car, with Bonnie trailing in the driver's seat of the car they arrived in. Doyle Johnson's life ended on Christmas Day, 1932, during a fatal botched initiation. Doyle Johnson's wife became a widow on Christmas Day. Okay, this part gets me bad. Hold on. Doyle Johnson's new baby became fatherless by the hand of Clyde Barrow. And these victim stories are all absolutely devastating. And sadly, they all have something in common. It's that Clyde and his posse cannot pull off any crimes without carnage. He's impulsive, he's unprepared, he's reckless, and he's ruthless. And how can people continue to romanticize Bonnie and Clyde after knowing what they know now, hopefully, and what the Bonnie and Clyde gang were willing to risk is beyond me. And for what? For what? So I've thought hard about what I would ask them if I had a chance. And although they would likely provide a non-satisfying response void of any remorse, I would want to know, like, in the end, was it all worth it? Was this all worth it? And it's heavy.
But when you look at antisocial personality disorder, which I'm confident that they would be diagnosed with today, again, it's that lack of remorse, lack of empathy. So was it worth it? It's not like somebody who experiences remorse or empathy in their response. They don't have the capacity to do that. So
there would never be a satisfying answer. It would just, would they tell me what I wanted to hear?
What do you want to hear?
If I said, was it worth it? Would their response be something non-genuine and just say something to satisfy me? Because I think I want to hear something specific.
They'd probably just be assholes.
I believe that.
And not really think about what you wanted to hear. It would just be off the cusp.
The next victim is another lawman, Deputy Malcolm Davis. Davis was shot in the dark by Clyde during a botched ambush. Are you noticing a theme here? None of their crimes can go off successfully. None. There is carnage in almost every single one. Okay, so we have our next victim. Now we have the Bonnie and Clyde gang, which we had Hamilton, Raymond Hamilton. He's in jail in Alabama still, okay? And now we have to go get him out of jail. So we have our new fresh recruit, W.D. Jones, and we have Bonnie and we have Clyde. Now we're headed down to Alabama and we're going to go to Raymond Hamilton's sister's house because she lives right next to the penitentiary where Hamilton is currently residing. What the Bonnie and Clyde gang do not know yet is that the law is actually hot on their tail. And they have figured out, based on some assumptions and investigating, that Bonnie and Clyde are going to go to Hamilton's house because Hamilton is a known associate of Bonnie and Clyde. And it is known that his sister lives near the jail, and it is assumed they're going to break him out. So the law actually goes into Raymond Hamilton's sister's house and tells her, do not say anything. We are going to be in this house. Clyde's going to enter the house and we're going to get him. Clearly, this does not go well for her because when they enter, Clyde comes to the house. She yells not to shoot and basically giving Clyde a warning. And what does Clyde do? Clyde shoots. So he shoots into the dark towards a figure in the home because he sensed it was an ambush and it was likely a cop. So he shoots. Now, this gunshot tells the other officer that there's danger. So he runs around the corner and that's when Clyde shoots again. And then he runs and takes off into the night. Because of this situation of Clyde going to Hamilton's sister's house and that failed ambush by the police, one of the police officers did lose his life at the end of the barrel of Clyde Barrow. So in Traherne's book, The Strange History of Bonnie and Clyde, Clyde's sister Nell is quoted by saying that Clyde actually told her this after she asked him how he felt knowing that he shot another man. Quote, "Like I always felt, sick inside, sick and cold and weak, and a sort of dull wishing that I'd never been born."
Ooh, that's powerful. I'm chewing on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Huh. So again, when we go back to antisocial personality disorder, we're thinking about lack of remorse, callousness, kind of violation of others. But then underneath that, what we just hear is his core belief, right? And so your core belief is underneath kind of all the defense mechanisms or the facade, like who you believe at your core or at your root. I should have never been born, right? There's not a more negative core belief, I would argue, than I shouldn't have been born. I think that he would be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder today. But then again, this is kind of pulling back another layer and looking underneath that antisocial personality disorder at these core beliefs, who he thinks of himself in the core.
And it's also, to his sister Nell, who he's constantly rewriting, I believe, his narrative to his sister Nell, who admittingly is a really big fan of her little brother. And we'll go into that into part 2 as well.
I'm still over here just kind of reflecting on that passage. That's really interesting. That's really sad.
And it was reported by his sister that he said that too. So the validity of that, it does come into question as well about what she wants everyone to.
Oftentimes too, so I say antisocial personality disorder, but a lot of times with personality disorders, it's more of a cocktail, right? You don't just kind of align with borderline personality or narcissistic personality or antisocial, all of the different personality disorders. Generally, you have a cocktail of several different ones. And for narcissistic personality disorder, narcissism, underneath that often is a very low self-esteem, low self-worth. And so kind of hearing like, I am worthless in that. I shouldn't have been born. I am worthless. That also kind of aligns with a cocktail of personality disorders in Clyde. And I would also say or argue that personality disorders are often a manifestation or second to trauma. And we know kind of just a glimpse into his life, not only the trauma that he caused, but trauma growing up in the Great Depression. There's kind of a lot that has been unsaid there. So it's a manifestation of trauma in many ways.
Hamilton is still in jail, so we need to introduce who joins their gang next. So we have Clyde's brother, who is Buck, and then Buck's wife, Blanche. So Buck and Blanche Barrow join the gang. Shortly after Buck's released from prison, he convinces his wife, Blanche, to take a detour from their new life at her family's farm, from doing honest work to go meet up with his younger brother. They missed each other. They grew up loving on each other, are best buds. And Clyde is living this criminal life, and Buck is just getting out, and he is promising Blanche, his wife, that he's going to go on the straight and narrow. But he says, but first, let's just do a little detour. And hesitant Blanche agrees because he misses his family. We'll go and meet up with Clyde, and then we'll continue on to my family farm and we'll have a nice life together. Blanche was formally married at a young age before she was with Buck, and Buck is her second husband. But Blanche was so physically abused during her first marriage. It was said that the physical abuse left her infertile from all the injuries, and they never had any children together. And she wanted Buck to turn his life around so badly, even though he had never done an honest job yet. She believed in him, and he agreed for her. He loved her so much. He's like, yeah, I'll go honest. But first, let's go see my little brother real fast. Some things obviously take a turn, downward spiral after his reunion with Bonnie and Clyde. So let's go there. Bonnie and Clyde, Blanche and Buck, and the teenager, W.D. Jones, rent 2 apartments next to each other in Joplin, Missouri to have their meetup. And Missouri at the time is known for being sort of a safe city for gangsters. So they took their chances. And under the name the Carnahans, they stayed for a few weeks. They spent their days inside, cooking, playing cards, etc., until they ran out of money. So Clyde and W.D. Jones have to leave the apartment to go scout places to rob, and unknowingly leaving their gangmates exposed to the law, who had tips from neighbors that were suspicious of them because they kept seeing multiple guns go in and out and multiple license plates on these cars. So yeah, they're suspicious that they were actually bootleggers because prohibition, the illegal selling and buying.
So much for a sanctuary city.
Yeah. So the neighbor's like, hey, I think there are bootleggers going in and out of here. So cops, do your thing. Upon Clyde and Jones's return to the apartment, they immediately spot policemen surrounding the area. Clyde calls out to warn Buck, Blanche, and Bonnie, who are inside, and the gunfire quickly begins. So this is really sad that 2 officers end up losing their lives that day during the shootout. Clyde was shot by a ricocheted bullet in the chest, finally. And W.D. Jones, he was grazed in the head by a bullet as well. And amid all the gunfire, so we have Jones, Buck, and Bonnie. They were able to escape with the aid of Jones's ability to jumpstart a police car, which was blocking their driveway. So Blanche had been so scared, though, during all of this, she actually runs out of the apartment during the gunfire, and she flees on foot. So she basically takes them by surprise. They see this frantic woman running out of the house, and she just runs, and they just let her just run. And she's like, bye. And she's just in this state of fight or flight, I guess, this panic. She just leaves them and she pieces out. She runs. And they end up finding her a few blocks away, frantic and freaking out. But when I say that W.G. Jones had to jumpstart a police car, it's because they had to back out of their garage. And it was actually also reported that they had to roll one of the police officers' bodies out of the way and then also jumpstart the car.
In the midst of gunfire.
In the midst of this gunfire. Yeah. So now they are penniless and they're injured and they're on the run and their end is actually near. So this is what I consider the beginning of the end of the gang. And this official meetup in Missouri is where the Barrow Gang is officially birthed. So this close encounter did provide at least some insight into the gang. They fled without most of their possessions. So they left behind a ton of stuff. And this is how we know a lot about the inner workings and thinkings of Bonnie and Clyde. So what they left behind 2 rolls of film, Blanche's purse, which contained her and Buck's marriage certificates. So they also had many of Bonnie's outlaw-obsessed poems she wrote, such as this infamous unfinished one called Suicide Sal. Bonnie was known for being actually quite intelligent and being a really prolific writer and having this obsession with outlaw literature. So once developed, the photos quickly circulated in newspapers, and Bonnie and Clyde were then known nationally by just their faces as well. So now for the first time, we have all these circulated photos of Bonnie and Clyde. And now we have those famous photos. Have you seen the photos of Bonnie and Clyde with her holding the weapons? Mm-hmm. And then her and Clyde together. And remember, she is very short. She's under 5 feet. And she's holding these big weapons. So it almost looks like a caricature of a criminal, which plays into these people aren't really real. No, this isn't a real thing. They kind of seem like just like folklore heroes in the paper. And she was given the nickname Cigar Smoking Gun Mole, as the famous photo of her on the front pages was the one of her smoking a cigar and holding a gun. And they named Clyde the Snake-Eyed Killer. So of all the things that Bonnie's family was upset about, though, the fact that Bonnie was seen smoking a cigar in public was at the top of the list. Is that not bizarre? Like murder,
Don't you smoke, girl.
Don't you smoke. Bonnie always insisted that she didn't smoke, and she only borrowed the cigar from Buck for the photo, yet nothing was contesting about like anything else. Oh, I didn't murder anyone. She never, like, that was never something she contested publicly on record. It was, I didn't smoke.
My kid would probably say the same thing.
So police orders were issued to shoot and kill Bonnie and Clyde upon sight. So this is personal for law now. We have multiple killings of lawmen. So now this gang needs to be stopped. Shoot them on sight.
Shoot.
They no longer wanted to take chances, and they had to move in the night and steer clear of any hotels, any public spaces, because everyone knew who they were now. However, they didn't know Blanche's face. So Blanche could go fairly undetected. They did not have Blanche's photograph. And up until that point, Blanche didn't commit anything.
No, she was just the girl that ran in the middle of gunfire.
Yeah. Oh, Blanche. So a few months passed, and spring brings warmer weather, allowing the Barrow gang to camp outside secretly and comfortably. Things were rough. Cleanliness obviously is hard, and yet Clyde was still demanding an image that he had procured of having clean pressed suits and being very well tailored. So, most of going into the town fell upon Blanche, as she wasn't recognized everywhere. So she was known for going undetected in public and getting their suits tailored and pressed and getting food for them. And, there were massive accounts of intense blow-up fights and then intense reconciliation between Bonnie and Clyde. Blanche goes on to recount how toxic this relationship between Bonnie and Clyde that she witnessed was. No shock.
Yeah. Talk about that relationship and that attachment style, right? Because it went from 0 to 100 in seconds, often a red flag for a toxic relationship.
So we have to talk about an event which marks a big shift in Bonnie and Clyde's relationship.
Do tell.
I will tell. This entire time, they've been managing to sneak back home and visit briefly with their family. But the last visit was actually very somber, as the family acknowledged that the end of Bonnie and Clyde would inevitably be soon. Buck and Blanche went on their separate ways to be with Blanche's family.
Oh, wise decision.
Very wise. And Bonnie and Clyde took off in another direction together with W.D. Jones. Bonnie told her mother that she would stay with Clyde no matter what, because when he dies, she wants to die too. So they stayed on the same destructive path together. And
trauma bond.
Here we go. There's a car accident, which throws Clyde out of a car. But he's able to get W.D. Jones and some weapons out, only to realize that Bonnie's still trapped in the car. Because Clyde is known for driving recklessly, carelessly, and wild. And remember, he has to drive without his shoe and in his socks because he's missing some toes. So that adds to the chaos of his driving. And he just loved to drive super fast and recklessly, gets in a car accident. Bonnie's trapped in the car. The car catches on fire. Bonnie is soon rescued by 2 nearby farmers.
Again, not Clyde.
Who aid a hysterical Clyde in pulling her out.
Okay. All right.
Now,
Some redemption.
Yeah. They then bring her to a nearby farmhouse to nurse her burns, which have taken over her body.
Oh.
So really?
Clyde is 100% the villain here. She is just his innocent, like trauma bonded girlfriend. I don't think that she really lacks the empathy or really carries the like callousness that Clyde does. I think she just got caught in this trauma bond of a relationship and is not the antisocial character that Clyde is.
Okay, well, agree to table that because I'm going to give you some more information. You ready?
Mm-mm.
Okay, what happens next likely won't surprise anyone anymore listening. So we have the rattled and scared 16-year-old W.D. Jones, and we have a traumatized and an intense, beyond physical pain Bonnie, who's in bed. And then we have a hysterical Clyde. And they're sitting in silence in this farmer's farmhouse in this back bedroom when they see the latch to the door slowly open. So these good Samaritans are trying to help these people that were found on the side of the road. In the state of fight or flight, W.D. Jones raises his shotgun and fires through the door, only to realize quickly that he shot the farmer's daughter-in-law.
Rookie move, bro.
With adrenaline pumping, all 3 bolt out the door into the darkness of the fields. And what they had not known actually was one of the farmers, one of the 2 that had rescued them, had become suspicious of the trio when they had denied the offer to bring Bonnie to a hospital. So he slipped away and called the police. The trio, they bolted out of this farmhouse, but they're greeted by 2 police officers who were there in waiting. And Clyde and Jones were able to actually take the police officers by surprise. They weren't expecting the trio to bolt out of this house. And unfortunately, the trio took the police car and the 2 police officers, and they fled for Texas, where they had a scheduled meetup with Buck and Blanche. Buck and Blanche come back.
So they let those 2 officers live.
They did.
I wonder why they did that. I wonder why they didn't kill them. Why did they take them with them?
Well, that is a really good question. And that is one we'll answer.
In part 2.
BRB. Hey, Google, why did... Well, the entire time... Stupid. Was that my funny? So the entire time, Bonnie had untended burn wounds, by the way. So they're stuffed all in this car together, and she is in excruciating with pain, open wounds. I mean, a burn is
horrific. A little burn on your little fingers hurts, let alone your own body.
Your entire body. And one of her leg is just mangled with burn marks. They did end up releasing the officers without killing them by tying them with wire to a tree to the side of a dirt road, which I don't understand. What I'm seeing is a pattern of killing in a shootout or killing first in a state of panic. If it's a us versus them, it's going to be a them instead. What I don't see happen in this situation is the police officers are not having a shootout with them, so they're not getting shot at themselves. So instead they take them.
But they still have a witness.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it's not as much of a worried about the witness versus the panic. They don't seem to think anything through. All 5 of the Barrow gang. So we have Bonnie and Clyde, W.D. Jones, and unfortunately, after Buck and Blanche visit her family, they reunite again. Now you can understand Blanche's feelings on this, not wanting her husband to get involved with this. And yet here they are deeply involved. And now it's the Barrow gang. So all 5 of them now have to flee out of Texas, and they stay over a week to attempt to nurse Bonnie back to health, but to no avail. So she's just going downhill, y'all. And she had no treatments. She had no medication, no drugs. She's just going quickly down. So against their best judgment, they had no option but to call a doctor to look over Bonnie. But the prognosis was not good. And he actually estimated that Bonnie wouldn't survive much longer.
Oh.
It's noted in Traherne's book that I cannot with you feeling for Bonnie. It's noted in Traherne's book that this even was what turned Clyde's fascination with Bonnie into an obsession. Clyde refused to leave her side and was all consumed with her recovery. And Clyde had Bonnie's younger sister, Billy, brought to her side to help aid her health back. But during this time, however, W.D. Jones and Buck were left to attempt robberies. And just like every other robbery, things went wrong and they were seen and they were recognized, thus making it impossible for them to stay in place, and they have to flee again immediately with an ailing Bonnie.
An actively dying Bonnie.
So here's the problem, though, is that we have 5 seats in one car, and there were 6 passengers. So Clyde decided he had to drive 2 separate trips to their next destination, which is already a huge risk as it is. Fleeing with your face on every paper everywhere. The papers are flying off the shelves because of these quote unquote lovers. I hate that word with them. They can't go anywhere. So what did they do? Okay, they go ahead and they find a refuge along a hilltop, and they stay there for 3 days, which allows the Barrow brothers to steal a doctor's car, which happens to have medical supplies in it. And they also go and rob a National Guard armory for weapons. And then they send Bonnie's sister Billy home on a train. So by July, Bonnie's burns are mostly healed, although her body and face were still covered in bandages. She was not able to walk without aid as her leg was permanently damaged. In fact, Clyde had to often carry her places. More codependency or what, Jo?
Maybe he does love her.
The gang found rest in rental cabins across from a diner where they had Blanche go infrequently to order meals for them. And this began to arouse suspicion from the diner owner, and he decides to phone the police.
Gosh.
That evening, the police organized an ambush, and it's this night that almost takes out the Barrow gang. Upon hearing police at the doors, Clyde piles everyone into the garage through the connecting door, and they open fire. Armed with automatic weapons, the gang sends bullets flying, hitting and injuring a few police officers. Buck, running to the car and taking shots at officers, is hit in return fire. The bullet hits him in the head.
Oh, Buck.
The gang manages to drag Buck into the back seat and into Blanche's lap. And she is actually being sprayed with glass from bullets hitting the car. And she has glass piercing her face and her eyeball. So
she doesn't even want to be a part of this life.
She does eventually lose her eyesight in one eye from all of this. It was that intense. So she's bleeding down her face, and Buck is bleeding out. The police were prepared to approach the gang. However, they actually weren't prepared to mobilize to take chase after the gang because they're thinking, hey, we've got them surrounded. I mean, how could this go wrong? But, Clyde's driving skills, the quick and rapid response to this ambush from the police, they're actually able to get away from this situation. And that meant that the gang could safely stop in some farmer's field and use this farmer's car jack to fix a tire and then take off. And the gang decides to drive through the night. And Clyde, who takes them to a public park to rest, realizes Buck's dying. Blanche has a face full of glass shards. She's profusely bleeding from one eye. And Bonnie's leg needs immediate attention and dressing changes. They're broke. They have no food. They have no water. They're basically camping. Campground from hell, basically. And the next morning, as they're slowly walking and moving about and getting ready to roast some weenies, they hear voices shout at them from behind the trees, "Do not move!" And neither should you, because we will be back in episode 1, part 2, to finish our series on Bonnie and Clyde.
This episode was produced by AnnLee Audio House LLC, a woman-owned company. Audio engineer and original score by Audio Stephen C. Nill. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review to help us grow, and make sure to say hey to us on our socials. I'm your host, Jo.
And I'm your host, Jules.
And we'll see you in part 2.
AnnLee Audio House LLC. My mama is a podcaster. I too.